Welcome to the Call to Adventure podcast. We have a very special guest today, Michael Atkinson. There's a lot of things that we could come up with and talk about who you are, but I think the best way to do this would be have you introduce yourself and tell our audience who you are and what you're about. So also, thank you for jumping on. We really appreciate it, man.
No worries. I'll just give you the quick version. Grew up in Canberra, watched the Bush Tucker Man, Top Gun, wanted to be a fighter pilot and the Bush Tucker Man, and kind of followed those kinds of steps to, it's kind of a long story, but I joined the Army as a helicopter pilot, then later transferred to the Air Force and flew a bunch of planes there, and then did a bunch of training in the military, which prepared me like as a survival instructor, and I did a whole bunch of other like expeditions privately that sort of gave me a feeling inside that I had enough credibility to start making my own adventure films. And then that's basically what I've been doing now for the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, you've put it in a quick story there, but I mean, there's so much behind that. I've started reading your book, Modern Day Castaway, which we'll shout out throughout this episode. But man, there was so much that I didn't know about you, and what you've achieved isn't such a small feat. Like, it's actually quite incredible what you've achieved, and you've done so much. And I'm curious, and I'm sure the listeners are curious, how did this adventurer life start? I mean, you touched on it with watching the Outback Tucker and all of that. But yeah, where did this start, and how did it start for you?
I remember as a small kid just always wanting to go to the bush and be out in the bush. And I grew up in Canberra, and I felt a bit kind of embarrassed that I lived in a city and I just wanted to like live on a farm. And so I went camping and stuff on the weekends. I think we had a view of the Brindabella Ranges, which is these big bushy ranges in the background. And so I spent a lot of time looking at that. That might have had some kind of thing as well. I was just more interested in being outdoors. And we also had a big area out the back of our house. Even though it was in Canberra, it was backed onto an old abandoned railway, road cutting. So we could do some cool stuff there, bows and arrows, and play around with homemade explosives and stuff. So we had it wasn't really full suburbia. And and my mate across the road was just really into fishing as well, and my dad used to take us fishing, and then we just sort of started doing that by ourselves and going out, camping overnight, when I was 13 on overnight multi-day hikes and things like that. And the adventures just kept growing from there. And then when I was in year 11 or 12, I can't remember, we skied from Mount Kosciuszko to Canberra, which is like 220 Ks. And that was it's like a pretty crazy idea at the time, and a lot of times during that adventure I just thought, oh man, this is nuts, shouldn't have thought of this. And then when I got back from that, I realized it was just a really amazing adventure. And yes, it sucked and we didn't think we were going to make it and all that kind of stuff at times, but that was like one of the most rewarding things I'd done. And then I kind of realized from that from then on I just wanted to keep doing adventures and keep putting myself outside my comfort zone to keep getting the same rewards.
Mike, can I ask you, with that experience, a lot of people use this term embrace the suck. There was a few moments on that particular experience that I guess spurred you on to keep going on these adventures. Could you maybe share a few moments, maybe epiphanies, realizations during that sort of spurred you on to continue?
Well, I mean, because I'd committed to it, so there's no way I was just going to give up for any kind of decent, unless it was a really decent reason. It was like we had extremely cold conditions. Like Australia normally doesn't get below like -5, even in the mountains, but we got -23, which is the coldest ever recorded in Australian history. So that was ridiculous, really. And we didn't actually know it was that cold at the time, but it was just felt bloody cold, and we didn't have really good bags and stuff as well. But we managed to get through it, and our rate of movement was slower than we expected, and we just kept on going at it. And I guess at that time, that's when I was genuinely wishing I'd never thought of the idea. But then later on, I recognize when I'm on an adventure, if I don't have that idea, then I haven't picked something that's far enough outside my comfort zone. So yeah, you do. I guess I didn't know the benefits of sucking up the suck at that stage, but I kind of learned it. And then shortly after that, I applied to be a pilot. The first time didn't get in, and then I joined the Air Force as like an army infantry kind of job, and that whole year sucked. And, so it was useful to have that background that sucking isn't the worst thing ever, and I still used how much that year sucked as a benchmark for when things suck. I just go, oh, it's not as bad as what I did in that year, So yeah, getting used to sucking is an important thing. That's what a lot of kids miss out on, is being in something that sucks and not. I think these days we kind of feel like if I'm in a situation and I'm not enjoying myself, I've done something wrong. Life's supposed to be fun. Why am I enjoying this adventure? It's like, well, you're not supposed to enjoy adventures. They're rewarding, but fun isn't the goal. So even when going on Alone in Australia and stuff, people are like, oh, was it fun? It's like, no, it wasn't fun. Of course it wasn't fun, but that's not the idea. And same with my last expedition that the book's about. It wasn't fun at all. It was bloody stressful. I was worried about dying the whole time. I wasn't comfortable. I was hungry, thirsty, stressed. But it's probably the most rewarding thing I've ever done in my life. So I think that's important for kids to know. It's okay for things to suck. And it's okay to suck for a long time. And if it doesn't get better, it doesn't matter. Like, it's just, that is life. And I think in the olden days, life just used to suck all the time. And people, no one used to probably complain about it as much as they do now. But life's so comfortable now. And I think it depends on what your benchmark for being uncomfortable is. If you grow up with discomfort, it feels normal. If you grow up with comfort and then go to discomfort, it's very hard. So it's easy to upgrade, but to downgrade to greater hardship is a really difficult thing to do. So that's why you're almost better off growing up poor in a hardship kind of environment than being growing up in a rich family, because it's just harder for you to experience those stresses and hardships.
Do you feel like, so you've gone through all of these adventures and now you're you're releasing books, and I mean, you've done movies as well and all that sort of stuff, but hearing you speak, then there's a lot of things that I can relate to and how I've put myself in uncomfortable positions to grow as an individual, and it's actually made everything around life a lot easier. Do you feel like there's a part of you that's trying to preach that message yourself and share that with the world, that getting uncomfortable is the perfect way to get comfortable? Or is it just something that's naturally occurred through your experiences?
Yeah, I'm not so much doing it because I'm trying to get a message out. If I want to get a message out, it's more so that people need to understand the environment more and what's happening to it and how we can look after it better. That's probably the main message I want to get out, is rather than, like some people say, my goal, I'm doing this adventure because I want to inspire other people. I don't do it for that goal, because I kind of feel like people are up to themselves to get their own inspiration. Like, it's not a bad thing if you inspire someone to do something, but it's not my job in life to inspire other people. Like, in the same way that I don't feel like it's anyone's job to inspire me. Like, my own motivation is my own thing, So I almost feel it's a little, I don't know. But yeah, I don't do it to inspire other people. But I certainly have environmental aims that I wish to influence.
Well, we can touch on those a bit later. That'd be good to share that message, because we both feel the same way. We're trying to better the environment as much as we can as well. Yeah. What was it like being a pilot? Like, I'm curious. I was reading in your book, you started in the infantry. Did you start in the infantry?
No, it was the Air Force, but it was like the Army. It was yeah. So yeah, being a pilot is the best bloody job in the world in many ways. Like, it's unbelievable. It depends what piloting job you're doing, mind you. Like, to me, like, I watched Top Gun and I always wanted to be a fighter pilot. But also when I was on that expedition, actually, that snowy Canberra to Kosciuszko to Canberra one, these 6 Army helicopters, I was actually taking a whiz on a peak, and these 6 Army helicopters flew past in like really close formation, like just underneath me, and I was like, "Whoa, that's unreal!" And so I also sort of started having this dream about being an Army helicopter pilot as well, which was good because I didn't get into the Air Force twice actually, and then eventually the Army started intaking for helicopters, and the Air Force wasn't intaking, so I thought I'll become a helicopter pilot first. And that's just an unbelievable job as well. So I mean, as a military pilot, to me particularly, if you're flying helicopters or fast jet, you are zooming around at low level or up at high level. In helicopters, you're really feeling engaged with what's happening on the ground. Like, we'd fly across Australia like multiple times, and you fly on low level and you'll see an emu and turn around and follow the emu and stuff like that. Whereas in a jet, you're flying across at 30,000 feet and chasing clouds instead. But it's an adventure. Every flight is an adventure. When you become an instructor, often things get a little repetitive, but when you go into new places and see new things, it's amazing. And I was going to Papua New Guinea and all around Australia, and as someone that really loves adventure and fishing, I had all these maps of Australia, and I'd circle them with a C for camping and an F for fishing, and all of Australia, particularly Northern Australia. I've got all these spots circled, and that's why it's easy when I now make films. Now I know what everything looks like. If I want a certain feel, I know where to go. But yeah, so that's the great side of it. You get paid a lot, you get more leave. There's a fair bit of esteem that comes with being a pilot, and the sensation of it is just amazing. Helicopters are unreal, but then when you get into aeroplanes, like when I was instructing in the Air Force, I was a low-level aerobatics display pilot. So I'd go out, by myself, do low-level aerobatics training. Then I'd go over, the CBD and do a display for, an event. It's just amazing. You come back, you're completely by yourself doing aerobatics in the middle of a CBD. Like it's cool. And then in a fast jet, you're like breaking the sound barrier or doing dogfighting or dropping live bombs. It's an amazing adventure. There's so many different aspects of it. So I was really lucky because I managed to do choppers, fast jet for a few years, and also some big jet. Big jet is not my thing. I was flying this AWACS thing with big radar on top, but that was cool as well because I was landing a Boeing 737 and another box to tick. So I've been very lucky to kind of round out all three main types of military aviation.
Just by the sounds of that, you've got a very rich life, and what I mean by that, it's filled with so many memorable moments for you. And you mentioned that there's a big filmmaking aspect, a part of your journey. When did that start? The want to document all of this? Yeah,
well, watching the Bush Tucker Man as a kid. So the Bush Tucker Man was this army major who, back in the 80s, released this ABC documentary series, and he'd drive around in a Land Rover and he'd find bush tucker with Aboriginal people, and he'd analyse it back in a lab, and he'd create these books and maps for army soldiers to use if they get war and they've got to survive off the land. So I just thought it was a really well done documentary. He's an excellent presenter and knowledgeable person. So that sort of got me into the bush tucker side of it, and the filming side of it too. My dad was a producer for a while in documentaries as well. I got to see how they got made behind the scenes a little bit, and that was more of a conventional style documentary, and I was amazed at how fake everything was, and I thought that, wouldn't it be good if you could make films where things weren't fake, you just shoot it like it really is, and so that kind of thing has really only been emerging in the last couple of decades. There's a really good film called Alone Across Australia by a guy called John Muir, who crossed Australia unsupported, and he did a really good job of filming it by himself as well, and that kind of gave me an idea well, that was awesome. He did an amazing adventure. There was no film crew, and it was just epic, and it's still probably my favourite program I've ever watched. So I guess that's some inspiration. He probably didn't do that as a goal to inspire anybody, but it inspired me as a byproduct. So I'm certainly grateful for that.
So you talk in your book, you talk about how you moved to Abu Dhabi. Is that correct?
Saudi Arabia. Yeah. So it's pretty close to it. So that was when I finished up in the Air Force. Basically, they hire ex-Air Force pilots due to their qualifications and experience to go and instruct Saudi Air Force pilots. So it's as a contractor for British Aerospace. So went over there for planning only 2 years, but the money's really good and it's tax free and stuff. And so I stayed there for 5 years, and that kind of helped to pay the house off so I could pursue this filmmaking dream that I'm doing now. And also I started doing my first filmed expeditions when I was over there as well. So that was a pretty cool experience.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about, so when you were talking about what felt right for you, I can't remember if you used the word, what was almost just real for you. You didn't feel like if you had to force a movie, it didn't feel real to you. So when you shot your first movie, which has won awards, you wanted to really be in it and make it as authentic as possible. And I can relate to that a lot with even posting content or even doing a podcast. We want this to be as real and authentic as it can be. What was that like for you? How did you figure that out, and how did you move all through that?
Yeah, so there's two sides, but one is the way that conventional documentaries are structured and created, which I didn't think was authentic, which I saw as a kid. But also, my best mate, the guy across the road, was getting into modelling with a local agency, and I sort of got involved and thought, I'd make lots of money and there'd be lots of girls, probably the main thing as well. But I sucked at it, and I didn't enjoy it. I hated fake smiling, and it kind of having to smile when you're not enjoying yourself it's just like a horrible thing. And so I just developed this hatred of it. And so I was really hardcore about that for a long time. And I still don't now I actually can kind of do it, and I just go, it's better. A fake smile is a worthwhile thing to do at times, but I sort of went extreme the other way. So even on my wedding photos, I'm not smiling, just because there's a camera in my face. It's probably the main thing. I didn't like the camera being in my face, and so when I made films, I tried kind of faking it a bit too. When I looked at the footage, and I just thought, oh man, that looks terrible. It just makes me want to vomit. And then I've slowly worked around just filming things exactly how they are. Although there's one side of it is your own authenticity, the way you come across. But then what I've learned, particularly from being on Alone Australia, for example, is if I'm going to film myself, I naturally, being someone who's in the military and done a fair bit of public speaking and stuff, you think quite carefully about what you're going to say and how you're going to structure what you're going to say. And so you'll get the camera set up, and then you'll think about it one more time, and then hit record, and then you'll deliver something quite nicely. It's authentic. You're not making up any lies, but you've pre-thought about how you're going to say something. And so that is how almost all television is made as well. And so you naturally copy that. But what I learned on Alone Australia from one particular director of photography down there who's got a lot of experience in self-shooting himself, he goes, what you need to do is not think about what you're going to say. Don't come up with a plan. Like, don't figure out how to build this canoe and then hit replay and then tell everyone how to make the canoe. Hit it on, turn it on, build the canoe, and sometime in that 10 hours you're going to stub your toe and go, damn it, this sucks, and you're going to talk just without preparing what you're going to say. And that's really what's really entertaining, because you don't see that on TV. And that's why YouTube's becoming so important and engaging, and has more views than conventional TV, and TikTok as well, because people are mostly or more likely to be just themselves without having thought about what they're going to say. So I'm really aiming now, when I turn the camera on, to not think about it. Like, so I'll liberally no, don't think about this. Think about pink elephants. Get the camera. Don't think about too much how well it's focused or the scenery. Just turn it on, start talking. Then later on, look at what you've said and go, okay, I need to get a bit of B-roll. I'll go get a bit of that. But don't think about it in advance, because that really does, without realizing it, confine you to the direction that you're going to take. And it's more exciting if people are just living in the moment. So that's the main takeaway I got out of being on Alone Australia, which I'm going to take forward to YouTube and stuff.
That's epic. I'm really curious about that. Yeah, it's such a unique scenario of you being alone, but you're actually not alone because you've got the camera there. And I guess you can sort of lean on that for a bit of, I don't know, solace or company. And you've titled your book Modern Day Castaway. And it reminds me of Tom Hanks in the movie Castaway. Yeah. And he develops that relationship with Wilson, the volleyball. Have you found yourself in situations where you're like, I don't know, where you lean on the camera to just talk and just to express and just to get thoughts out in the open?
Yes, and so not so much on the Barrier Reef trip, although no, it did actually happen. I just didn't quite realise it at the time. But on Alone, definitely, particularly for the last 30 days, it started to take that Wilson kind of... and you become... you look forward to talking to it. And also, it's on Alone too, you know that what you're saying is going to reach people. Maybe not that sentence, because only probably 1 in 100 sentences do, but you know you're not wasting your time when you're filming yourself on a show like that. So yeah, it was good. And I definitely did, having that kind of presentation thing made aware to me. I was really just trying to concentrate on not concentrating, if you know what I mean. And so I was able to sort of achieve that, particularly in the last half. The first half, I was probably doing my normal thing, and I was, a little bit closed off and stuff, I reckon. And so then I was looking at guys like Chris. In fact, all of the other contestants, they were selected because, amongst many things, because they were able to just speak freely in front of the camera without thinking about it too much. So that's part of the disadvantage that I had, is that I was probably the one with the most filming background, and it's hard to bang all those habits out of someone. So those guys were like that from day one. So, like Chris just wore his heart on his sleeve with all that PTSD stuff, and every single one of the other guys and girls were just really sort of open and in the moment on camera. And so I'm taking a leaf out of their book moving forward.
Beautiful. Let's talk about Alone, man. Because me and my housemate, we were watching you, and we were just hooked on you the entire time. It felt like they were showing you the most, but maybe that's just because we were a little obsessed with you. Some of the stuff and the antics that you were coming up with, man, building a kite, like building a canoe, like you were the only one that built anything like that. You had so many creative ideas. Where did that all come from, man?
I did have some plans in place, but I also knew not to plan too much because things rapidly change when you get on the ground and find that something is not really an option when you thought it was. So I had a whole bunch of inventions which I never got a chance to use, which I'll use on future stuff. So yeah, I mean, I didn't plan to make a kayak straight away. Like I would normally hit the ground and do an enormous recce of the entire area, figure out in that first 5 days, where the best resources are, best fishing spot, and then move to there and then start life. But because I basically, as I got dropped in, I started to feel really tired. And it turns out I had COVID. And so that we had 2 rat tests with us. And the next morning I did a rat test and sure enough I had COVID. So I was petrified because I thought straight away they were going to remove me. So I made them aware of it. I considered not telling them, but then I thought they're going to come out, and do med checks, and I don't want to give them COVID because it could ruin it for the whole production if I kept it quiet. And then they weren't as careful around me knowing I had COVID. So anyway, I told them, and they said I could, stay out there as long as things were okay. So I didn't want to complicate COVID and be more likely to have complications and get removed by doing a really strenuous recce. So it changed my whole plan. And that's why on day 2, I thought, I was going to make a kayak at some stage. So I may as well start doing it now because it's lower activity and workload level to make a kayak. And that's why I started making it so early on. But I think it looks like I'm getting really fancy with all the fishing stuff and not doing any of the basics. But like I do understand the basics of survival, and the basics really are, fishing line in the water catching fish is the most effective way. I've done it. I've had that experience on so many different fishing trips and survival trips, whether it's combat military stuff or not. It's just fishing is really important. But that just was not working in my spot. So lure fishing normally works everywhere else in Australia for trout. It just did not work there. And so I was trying all these different things with like different baits, different depths, different presentation techniques, different, I tried everything, but nothing was working. So that's why I just kept getting fancier and fancier. But because they show all the fancy stuff, people often think, oh, he's getting too fancy, but it's just the basics weren't working.
There was a couple of times you were real stiff with the patty melons.
Yeah. That was really quite, there was some unlucky times, came so close. And so, I mean, the first one, I think it ended up going under the tripwire, but there's a bit of a long story to that as well, because we're allowed to take snare wire, and I had this special thin snare wire that I had taken down to Tassie, and we were allowed a certain weight of the wire, and I weighed it on our scales, and our home scales were in error. So when I got down there, they said, you've got too much wire, you had to remove some, and I mistakenly took all the thin stuff off, so I didn't have my thin tripwire. So then I used something as an alternative, which had some stretch in it. So just that one thing, our scales at home being out, probably prevented me from getting that first patty melon because it stretched the line as it went underneath. And then after that, I made a pressure plate, which they didn't show. But then that disturbed the ground too much, so I moved the trap site. I moved the trap sites all over the place. But eventually I went back to using a thicker wire, tripwire, and that worked because you saw it set off. And so, yeah, I mean, it was so close. You saw it just get out of the trap there. But then about a week later, it actually got in the trap. So I got the patty melon in the trap and it busted out of the trap. Like it just broke through the net. So then I made a stronger net. So there was all these other things too, like then I used elastic to make the trap snap down to the ground so it couldn't get out. So there's all these different little grades of trap development which you didn't get to see. And so yeah, after it snapped out of the net, I thought, for a while there's nothing I can do. And then I realized if I slit my remaining bit of tarp into like this daisy chain thing, like a Christmas decoration that you pull apart, it will be a really strong net. And it was, and I tested it, and I spent another 4 or 5 days making this huge net. And so that was all set up. Just when I got removed, I had a net that had proven to catch patty melons with a net that was definitely strong enough to hold one. So that was frustrating as well.
Yeah, you haven't watched it.
Yeah, for those who haven't seen the series yet, can you give us some context of what went down? Like, where were you? You just got dropped in a random place. What did you start with? Yeah, can you go into that?
Sure. Yeah, well, and I probably should say, if you guys just could insert at the beginning a spoiler alert for those that haven't watched it, just so they can watch the series and not have it ruined for them.
Yeah, for sure.
So basically there's 10 people, they get dropped out in a wilderness area with 10 items that they can choose from a list. There's about 40 things you can choose from on the list. And from that 40, you can only choose 10. And there's also a clothing list that you can take, but there's 10 main things that you survive with. You get dropped out in the bush, you've got camera gear, and you just self-document everything. And the last one out there who can stay the longest wins. And they have medical checks, which come out and just make sure you're going okay as well. So, but it's, you're mostly by yourself with no human interaction.
Talk to us about, because there's certain moments throughout, like you hadn't eaten for, 18, 19 days at the start, and you had...
the first one was 23 days.
23 days.
No food,
And you, we were watching you and that eel came in. And you didn't grab it, mate.
Yeah.
Like, how defeated were you when you lost that eel?
Yeah, I mean, it sucked. But the thing is, it's when you watch it, people just go, oh, that was really dumb. It actually wasn't dumb. So the problem was I slipped and the line came out of my mouth. So the backstory behind it. So basically, I had this eel, finally hooked one, and it was at the base of a very steep slope. It doesn't look that steep on camera, but it's really steep. It's like you need one or two hands to climb up it. And so I couldn't just drag it to the top of that hill, and the line was anchored to the bottom next to the water. So if I had tried to drag it up the hill, it wouldn't have reached to the top and it would have to come back down again. So I had to either untie the line or cut it, which is just the worst thing. You can even hear me saying, oh, this feels wrong because I'm cutting the line, but I didn't really have a choice. So I cut it, put it in my mouth to hold it because I needed two hands because it was so steep to get around this tree stump that was right in front of me that you can't see because it's literally in my crotch. And as I put the knife down after cutting it, I put it down as well. So I slipped and I was concerned about the knife and my crotch and I basically said fuck, and as I said fuck, I let go of the line in my teeth, and then I was like fuck again. I've lost the bloody fish. So in hindsight, what I would do now is actually tie another knot, tie it around my hand, and then cut it. I just didn't think of that at the time. So there is a better way of doing it, but it was spur of the moment stuff, I've lost so many decent fish by stuffing around at the water's edge. You don't want to stuff around, and it had already got snagged as I was trying to move it around. It got snagged again. So heat of the moment, and they were reasonable decisions that I made. I just got unlucky again by slipping. So yeah, but the way you see it on camera, it makes me look like a bit of a turkey. I get that. I learned something from it as well. So you get that. But also, I wasn't that hard on myself, and so that's another thing I think, and that's a coping mechanism, and that's a spiral that people get down, is that they are too hard on themselves and they quickly forget the reason for the decisions that they made. So when I finished, I was like, I'm spewing. That really sucks. But you know what? Everything I did there was a deliberate decision and it didn't go my way. So I'll just look at the positives. At least there's a bloody eels around. That's fantastic, because up until now there's nothing. But I think people often, they'll make a deliberate decision, which is probably for valid reasons. Something will go wrong. Might even be a relationship thing. They won't choose that partner or whatever. It might be a job thing. And it doesn't work out well, and they go, oh, I'm an idiot for making that decision. It's like, well, you're not. You considered all the options, and you took that job, and that job just, you couldn't foresee that it was going to be a shit job, and you always would have been wondering. So people are too hard on themselves, and then they lose confidence in their decision-making abilities, and they start to not make decisions and kind of clam up. So, give yourself a break. You're doing your best. So when something goes wrong, don't beat yourself up too much. I think it's an important thing for people to think of.
That's really well said, man. That was something that I wanted to ask you along the lines was, you're in, how was it? How long was it? 57 days, or was it into the 60s?
64.
64 days. And there would have been times when you had to sort of face those thoughts surely throughout, where you're like, I don't know if I want to keep doing this. And then, did that come up? That never arose. So that's really incredible. Like,
well, there's no, I'm not saying I would never leave, but I would only leave if I thought I needed to medically. And I was nowhere near feeling like that. So that's another thing too, because I went in there with the mindset, I'm going to do my absolute best unless I'm either removed or I think this is bad. The disadvantages outweigh the advantages, and I felt a long way from that. I was never going to leave, so I didn't bother focusing on that decision at all. And that's something that happens to people quickly. If you don't go in with a 100% commitment mindset, even if you go in with a 90%, you're going to spend a lot of time mulling that decision over in your brain. That's, if you spend 5 hours a day thinking about that decision, that's 5 hours a day that you didn't think about trying to outsmart the fish or catching, food or whatever, So I was focused all the time on the survival aspects. And so the more focused you get on the decision to stay or not, waste all your brain space, you're going to have less food, and it sort of spirals out of control.
I think it's a really relevant and also prevalent challenge that a lot of society goes through. And you mentioned this mindset. It's almost, I don't know, from the average person, some would describe it as a bit wacky, a bit obsessed, a bit addicted. Do you acknowledge that? And also the follow-up question is, what does your family think about all of this as well?
Yeah, sure. No, I don't. If people think that, it's only because they don't understand the mindset. So it's not irrational at all. It's the opposite. It's completely rational. When you can, the more you've done this kind of thing, the closer your perception of the risks and reality is to someone who hasn't done it before. So, going on alone wasn't my first time being alone for a long time in the bush on a survival situation. So I knew exactly what to expect. So I was at a huge advantage in that regard to the people that hadn't done it before. And the next time that they do it, they would have more experience, and they'd probably stay longer, I reckon. It's life. It doesn't, first time you drive a car, you're not that good. The second time, third time, fourth time, you're more used to it. So yeah, I've done it quite a lot of times now. So yeah, it's easy to stay focused. And, for me, there's more at stake for me probably than for most other people, because this is my job. Like, people will go back to their normal jobs, but this is my normal job, or I'm trying to make it my normal job. So how well I do has an impact on my future job. So that, I had more riding on it, and like I was saying, like, I was on a high paying job in the Air Force in Saudi Arabia and stuff, but now I'm not really earning much at all, other than that's going to start coming in from the book and the film. So I've taken a big financial risk. So there's that as well. It's like, I need to bring some money in here. So there's no way I'm going to come home unless I've given it 100%. And if I felt like my body was in a situation that I was damaging it permanently, I would weigh that up, and then I would go home to my wife and say, look, I felt like I was damaging my health, so I came home. A lot of people tend to think that very early on. I didn't feel like I was anywhere near that. Wasn't even on the radar. So, but that's because I've experienced this stuff. So literally 8 months before going on alone, I was on the Great Barrier Reef starving for 50 days, and I didn't put any weight on for that one. So, whereas I put 20 kilos on, like 19 kilos for alone. So I had a 30-day buffer. So my last expedition, even though it was 50 days, was in a way equivalent to alone. It was 80 days. So I'd already pushed my body quite hard, harder. I felt much more fatigued from a starvation perspective on my previous adventure. And I'm sure there must have been some minor damage to my body, but by the time I did the medical testing for alone, it was all, really rosy. You got excellent health. So the body is very capable of withstanding these short term, when I say short term, months is short term in a lifespan. And there's many aspects to aging research. The latest aging research is it's good to stress your body with starvation. It helps to activate your genes to repair themselves. So I think it's probably going to make me live longer doing this kind of stuff than live shorter.
I want to ask one more question about alone before it would be a perfect transition into your book, The Castaway, which you just talked about, your Great Barrier Reef. What was the toughest challenge for you on alone?
It was food. That's just plain and simple food, really. Yeah. Starvation's not actually that bad. So I starved for 23 days. Then I got a week of food, and then I starved again for another 18, 19 days before getting any more food. And the body's just used to that stuff. So it's uncomfortable, but it's hardship. I had a really good quote on TV yesterday about that, where pain is, you can't avoid pain, but you can choose whether it affects you or something like that. You just got to, I couldn't put it out of my mind. I constantly had food fantasies, but you just go, oh, well, just harden up, And so a really good coping mechanism for that kind of hardship is looking at other people who've done it harder than you. So, Anzac soldiers in World War II and World War One, Aboriginal people on the frontier wars, getting kicked off their land, murdered, massacred. They did it a hell of a lot tougher than I've done anything in my life. So that's a really good coping mechanism. Someone's always done it harder than you have.
Did you ever feel alone?
No, No, because I also know that it's temporary. So when you're in those kind of moments, it feels like, wow, my life will never be the same. It will be. Just give it a month. It'll be the same when you get home. And so it's like people that climb Everest. They spend all these things. They finally get there and they come home and they kind of like, oh, you know what? I don't feel any different. It's because you're not any different. You're the same person. You just got to the top of a mountain. So you are the same person when you get home. So when you find yourself back on the couch, you'll be like, if you didn't put 100% in, you're like, man, why didn't I just go a bit harder? So yeah, having that bigger picture view I had from the beginning, because I've done it before. And you're asking about what does my family think of this. So my wife's used to it because our second date, I took her out to the Kimberley and we did 500 Ks in a tinny and dropped her out on the coast and stuff. And we walked back again. So she's been used to it from the beginning. She used to, go along with the more hardcore trips. Now she's not interested in that stuff. She'll still come along and stuff, but she doesn't want to do the really hardship stuff. So because she's used to it, the kids haven't known anything different. And I am lucky that she's happy for me to continue these kinds of things. Like I'm quite responsible about it. Like, I mean, there's the risk side of it, but she knows that I think about that very carefully. And there's the financial side of it. But, I worked really hard in a high paying job to have the freedom to do it. It wasn't like the family's, destitute or anything like that. So, it's not the smartest decision financially at the moment. It may be in 10 years time, but it may not be, but it doesn't matter. You only live once. My goal in life isn't to die rich.
Yeah, it was really important that, from the start, I think it's cool to hear that you guys set that from the start. Like, you took her on a great adventure and obviously those standards were set, and to be able to keep doing that. And I think a lot of men, well, a lot of people in general don't actually allow themselves to do that and make it okay for them to go do their own thing and go travel or go on adventures. And it's like, you're a prime example of that. I think it's fantastic that you have the ability to do it. Like, it's long extended periods of time. I'm sure not everyone could do as long as you could away from their partner, but yeah, just the fact that you can just go and do as you need to do, because otherwise you wouldn't be you wouldn't feel you, would you?
That's right. Yeah. And so that's something that I am very lucky that my wife can see that bigger picture. And I know plenty of friends whose partners don't give them that freedom. And also with kids, like, I've taken my kids on some pretty crazy solo stuff. Like when my son was 3, we did a week in Tassie and, on a pretty crazy track. And my daughter, last year, 4 days of snow camping in a blizzard and stuff. So part of that is that she trusts me from a safety perspective to know what I'm doing. But also, yeah, she knows it's important, and it is really important for the kids as well. And so I think they've benefited a lot from that stuff. Like, they're not out there going, oh, this is great, Dad. Like, a lot of the time they're just putting up with crap, like walking through, scratchy bushes or freezing their butts off in the cold or whatever. But they're not out there, looking like they love it the whole time. But they're doing an adventure as well. And they're not, what I really appreciate is they're not complaining about it. Like, they just suck it up. And I really appreciate that they do suck it up.
Yeah, that's cool.
How is that rubbing off on your kids? Like, do you see a certain attitude, mindset developing in them? Like, when they come back, do they say, wow, that was a really great trip, I got a lot out of it? Yeah, how do they?
They don't say those kinds of things. It's more that later on when you do another adventure, you go, man, they're putting up with a lot. Like, I've instructed a lot of people in the military for survival stuff, and I'm like, most blokes would be pissing and moaning about that right now, and they're not. They're just sucking it up. So I see that, but it's not like they come back and it's like in the movies with like, oh, I feel so good, Dad. Yeah. And a lot of the time they're quite honest about it, and like as well. And I appreciate that. They're never trying to please me by pretending they like something in order to please me, and I appreciate that as well, because that's the thing too. I think if you put so much pressure on your kids to do something, that they will feel like they have to enjoy it to keep you happy, and then they're not enjoying it, and then they hate it because no one likes faking it. So yeah, but so far I'm really happy but neither of well, actually my daughter's pretty into the outdoorsy stuff now, but my son's not so much into it. But that's cool. Like, I don't want him to have my own to take my dreams on. He's got his own. And so that bush tucker man guy that I sort of was inspired by, I guess, his son just hated that kind of stuff because he was a helicopter pilot too, and I didn't know him well, but I knew him, and he you can quickly turn your kids off what you do just by doing it. So I just don't want to do that, But also, it's good if they don't do what I do because I'd be worried about this time.
Win-win. That's a big win-win.
Yeah, cool. That's beautiful. All right, let's talk about this. So, Modern Day Castaway, you've only just recently released this book. This was... Let's talk about this. Where did the inspiration start for the Modern Day Castaway?
Sure. So that I wasn't planning on writing a book. Just the adventure was so epic, and I started editing the film, and I thought I should write a book. So it stemmed from when I left the military and started prepping myself up for getting ready for filmmaking. I thought what I'll do is put myself in historic survival situations and see if I can survive my way out. So that's what I did when I was in Saudi Arabia. I came back to Australia during Ramadan and did a 6-week thing in the Kimberley, where I placed myself in the historic survival situation of 2 German aviators, and I welded up some seaplane floats out of 44-gallon drums to simulate what they had, and sailed along the coast and walked out and made a film about that. So that was the first film that I made, and that's the one that's got some awards, and it's it's showing on 7+ at the moment. If you just Google surviving the Outback, you'll find it. You can view it for free in Australia on 7+. So that was the first one. The second one was actually when I was in Saudi. I did another one where I bought 2 camels, a mother and a baby, and crossed a desert, or tried to cross a desert. A lot of difficult things happened, and I was living off camel milk and dates. That's why I bought a mother and a baby, because camels don't lactate unless they have a baby. So that was number 2, which I haven't edited yet because I've been too busy. But when I left and I came back to Australia, I wanted to do something on the Great Barrier Reef, particularly after that camel expedition in the desert. So I researched survival situations on the Great Barrier Reef, and there's this guy called James Morrill who was shipwrecked in 1846, and he lived with Aboriginal people just south of Townsville for 17 years, and then re-assimilated into white society when the wave of white settlement went through where he lived. And then he wrote a book about it. So you know what stuff he had and what things were like, and it's a beautiful snapshot of Aboriginal culture at the time. And so I didn't want to copy what he did, so I just wanted to escape to where he could have escaped to. And so there was a rescue haven set up in north of Cape York by Governor Bligh, and it was set up 20 years before he was shipwrecked, so he wouldn't know about it. He was a professional sailor. So my goal was to use his materials and see if I could get to this rescue haven, which was 1,500 kilometres north. So I built a dugout canoe using historic tools, and which took 14 months. And I sailed it up the coast over 50 days, living completely off the land and the sea, using only historic equipment. Navigating with a sextant and just whole crazy stuff. And I ended up managing it, but it was really, really difficult. And when I got back, I know there's a film coming that I'm going to put together about it, but I just thought I should write a book about this. And I had another adventure friend of mine who just writes books. He does adventures and writes books about them. He doesn't make films. And we'd had the conversation, and I said, if I was going to write a book, what would you recommend? And he goes, I would talk into a dictaphone every couple of days and talk about the details so you can come back and refer to that when you do your book. So that was really good advice. So whilst I wasn't definitely going to do a book, when I got back and thought about how big it was, I thought, yeah, I may as well. So I thought it would take 4 months, and a little bit like the canoe, it's taken almost a year really. So I've done an audio book as well and an ebook, and basically everything that I think is going to take a certain amount of time takes 4 times longer. But I think that's human nature, because if you actually knew how long something was going to take, you probably wouldn't undertake most of the things that you set off on. Yeah. So that optimism that keeps, it makes you look a bit naive and gullible, but really I think it's probably deliberate. It's that optimism is a deliberate thing which encourages you to try new things. Yeah, and so the book's it's only been out for a few weeks or whatever. Now I'm just getting into the film. So when I tour around with the film, and I'm going to do a road show with the canoe, show the film, and people can come and look at the canoe, the stuff I had, my alone stuff as well. So I got my alone kayak and fishing rod and all that kind of stuff, and then they can buy a copy of the book, and all those things go together.
Yeah, we won't reveal too much about it, but there's some. I haven't read all the book yet, but I'm just finished reading about your canoe story, and there's some crazy adventures just in between that, and definitely recommend purchasing it. Is there anything you want to ask about the book?
Yeah, Mike, where does this rank in terms of the level of suck or difficulty among your other adventures?
Oh, that was the hardest one, because it was constant safety risk. So I was really worried every day about sailing, and there's the croc risk as well, but mostly it was about getting rolled over and then being in crocky water and drowning and all that kind of gear. And there's no support crew on that at all. No one following me. So I already I didn't want to call for rescue, that's for sure, because when I was testing the canoe down here, I actually had to get a tow on the open ocean from the cops. Something busted and things didn't go my way, so I already felt like I'd used up my brownie points for a rescue. So yeah, it was really, really stressful.
How much did it connect you even closer to the land and the Aboriginals?
A lot. And so the conclusion that I draw from that experience is, and I compare how easy it would have been for my shipwreck survivor to survive compared to me. And it's harder now to live off the land for a bunch of different reasons. But if you look at the land by itself, Aboriginal people have been removed from it, so they're not traditional burning. So the bush looks completely different now to how it looked back when Captain Cook arrived and the shipwreck survivor was here. And that we know that because Captain Cook's artist drew stuff, Captain Cook wrote about it, Charles Darwin wrote about it. All these scientists of the day described the landscape as having lots of grass, less trees, lots of animals. It doesn't look like that now. You walk into a national park, you try and walk in a national park now, and you generally can't walk because there's so much scrub and bush that you can't even walk through it. And therefore there's no grass on the ground. So if you're a farmer trying to stock cows in a paddock and you don't give them any grass, you can't have any cows in the paddock. So there's a lot less animals now than there is in Australia than there used to be. And the plants, Aboriginal people used to burn specifically for certain plant types. So there's less plant bush tucker as well. So it's harder to live on the land. And on the sea, we've overfished it a lot. And so the southern half of my voyage, where I was close to the population centres, I didn't catch a single fish trolling. When I got past the population centres, I started to catch fish regularly. So that just shows how much we've overfished the ocean and the Great Barrier Reef, and the coral's being bleached as well. So it's much harder now to live off the land and sea.
That's interesting. Hearing you say that it was easier to survive back then than it is now because of...
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, people used to go out and like, even in Sydney Harbour, when the first fleet arrived, they used to just like get so many fish, like, just walking across water on fish schools in the middle of Sydney Harbour. And it's recorded. I think after about 10 years, all these commercial fishermen started just wax the place with commercial fishing gear, and the fish never recovered. So it's happened in the first decade since we got here, and the fishing just keeps getting worse and worse every generation. So if you go to a fishing club and look back through the decades, in the 60s there'll be a guy holding up a huge snapper, and every decade the snapper gets smaller, and now like you get a barely legal snapper, and that's won the fishing competition. So. But we don't notice how much the baseline shifts because we only see one of our lifetimes. But if you go back, 200 years, it's a huge degradation.
So what do we do about that, Mike?
The biggest thing about fishing is really we need to stop our population growing. That's the elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about, because and people recreationally want to go out fishing. I understand that as well. So now we have these sanctuary zones, these green zones, where basically a third of the barrier reef you're not allowed to fish anymore. We need those things. So the more people we have on the planet, the more restrictions we're going to have. So your quality of life is going down. If we double Australia's population, we're going to need twice as many sanctuary zones. So all we think about these days is growth and jobs and growth and jobs. No one's looking at the big picture politically. So it's obvious that we need to not encourage our population to grow with baby bonuses and all that kind of gear. There's a whole bunch of environmental stuff we can do. On land, the most important thing is to allow Aboriginal people the freedom to start traditionally burning again. And there's highly trained Aboriginal people that have, still maintained that brain's trust of information about how to do it. It's slowly coming back in again, but our Western authorities are very slow on the uptake. And like if you look at the Black Summer bushfires, that would not have happened at all like that if traditional burning had been allowed to continue. And we would there'd be so many more animals in the bush as well. But we can't see that because we're just used to what we see now.
It's a big it's a controversial opinion, isn't it? Because it's like I've heard people say the complete opposite to you, where we're actually not generating enough population in the world. Like you look at people like Elon Musk and other people.
It's very amazing that he in particular says that. Yeah.
So it's cool to hear a different perspective.
But I mean, that's why on this trip I didn't catch any fish trolling where there's population, and when I got past them, there was heaps. Not heaps. There was enough to catch regularly. There's fish stocks are just really tanking for many species all around the world. Having more people is only going to make it worse. So yeah, it is. Yeah, basically, rich people profit more from a growing population, or they think they do. That's why it continues, because power and influence and money can influence politics. That's why a politician would never talk about population.
Are you going to get into politics then, Mike, and change the world?
Yeah, maybe one day. If I thought that was a better way of doing it, yeah. Don't know. Yeah, whichever way contributes the most.
Myself and Luke, we've had personal conversations around this idea of abundance in modern society and how it's becoming a sort of like a disease because we're sort of always wanting more, and that's just, I guess, human nature. And you mentioned the quality of life is something that I guess we have to look at and maybe start accepting that we maybe need to slow down the rate of the luxuries we have in the day to day, because it just allows us to want more and more. And I guess that goes back to your first point of like we need to start embracing a bit more of the suck. How are you sort of?
Well, I think we sort of do. We actually don't. I think that's what big business wants you to think, that we have to embrace the suck and stop our population growing. But I think the population growing is actually making our quality of life worse. So it's if you want to go surfing now, it's hard to find a decent wave where I live because everyone's on it. There's less fish. House prices are gone absolutely nuts because the population keeps growing. So certain people benefit. I think the majority of humans would benefit, have happier lives with less population. So it's actually better for us. We'll have better lives. We'll just stop adding extra people. It's like if you have a paddock and you got 100 cattle in it and it's only supposed to have 10, the cattle aren't going to have very good food to eat. Like Earth's kind of the same. It's a finite resource.
How do you preach that to someone that wants to have a family though?
Well, just it's better not to have huge families, really. I've had 2 kids. I've had a friend who has had one and would stopped it there. There's nothing. Everyone's different. I'm not trying to talk about the one child policy in China or things like that. You don't need to do that. You can, for starters, you can stop things. I don't know if the baby bonus is still in there, but the government, has historically had all these policies to try and increase population, because they're looking at the short-term gain at the economy growing. But even that doesn't really make sense. It's like if you got a 3-bedroom house, right, and there's 3 people sharing the house. If you add an extra person to the house, you're going to increase the economy of that house by 33%, aren't you? But now you've got a crowded house and it's not as fun to live in. So it makes the figures look great by crowding a country, but it's not as good a place to live. Optimally, probably 1 or 2 people in a house is about right. So it's about making smart decisions, not decisions to make figures look impressive.
Yeah, that's actually a refreshing perspective.
And I think particularly AI is going to change everything ridiculously in the next 5-10 years. So we've got enough. There's enough machines and stuff that can do most of our everything difficult for us as humans. So if AI doesn't take over and we can just live off their benefits, like that kind of, we don't need to go hard at it so much in a really hard to grind job. But I think we're probably going too much down the far right where it's all about profit, because only a certain amount of entities are going to own these kind of technological advances, and everyone else is going to be left with nothing. So, I won't go down into that whole area, but we do need some way of looking after each other in society, and that balance is probably swinging too far, I'd say, to the direction of it. Stuff the poor people. It's all about business kind of thing.
Yeah, we live in a world of capitalism. It's all it's about is the money and the power, as you said, and the influence. So
yeah, but I think with a healthy democracy, and if we get rid of the influence in politics of donations and stuff, quickly those things will go away. Like if rich entities can't influence the decisions, then we'll get better decisions made. So that's the first thing. We're solving the world here, aren't we? But there's practical ways of achieving these things. Democracy is fragile as well. So, I think everyone takes safety and for granted. But you look at some countries where it's not. You can't take that for granted. Overall, you do have to. One person can't change the world that much, and you really do have to be grateful for what you have. I guess I'm switching tacky because you can talk about that other stuff all day, but you do have to live in the moment. Things might be different for all of us in 5 or 10 years in a bad way. So that's another reason to get out and do the odd adventure here and try and spend some quality time with the fam. Because you just never know what's going to happen.
Mike, I'm really curious about how the transition period looks like from going on these crazy adventures for months on end and then having to come back into the ordinary world. What does that transition look like for you?
Well, now that I've done it a few times, I've sort of worked out my process. But the first time when I came back from that Kimberley one, that was a lot of hardship. So I promised myself that I was going to eat more and I was going to drink more. So I did, and I kept for about three or 4 years afterwards. I was drinking alcohol every night because I'd promised myself to enjoy life more, and I was eating more ice cream because I'd promised myself to enjoy my life more. So that ended up catching up with me after 3 or 4 years, and I realised that I was eating and drinking too much. And now when I get back, now I give myself 2 or 3 weeks, and then I just go nuts, and then I just go back to normal. Because by that stage, my weight has got back to where it is normally, and I can just progress on further normally. So you can sort of give yourself a little bit of PTSD from those experiences, but now that I've done it a few times, I can kind of plan for what my brain is going to demand and what it should actually get.
And talking about that reaction from your brain, where does your hand go first in the pantry? Is it straight to the snacks, ice cream?
Well, normally I'd go for iced coffee, cherry ripe, and chicken parmigiana. Like that's what my last barrier reef one. When you get off alone, because it's all supervised by doctors, they have a very slow, gradual increased refeeding program, which takes all the fun out of it. It's there for a reason. I think it's done more harshly than it needs to be. But there was a study done in the concentration camps in World War II when the concentration camps were liberated, and the Americans, doing what they thought was best, just gave everyone carte blanche on food, and quite a few people did die. So that's why they have these refeeding programs. Luckily, it doesn't seem to affect me. I think probably because I've never pushed myself far enough, and what I've done is nothing like what happened to those poor people. But I think in conservative medical society, they don't quite know where the boundary is between those things, so they'll always err on the side of caution, which is starving you for longer. So that's why I like my own expeditions. I just stuff myself stupid. The cravings quickly go away though. So and then food you really enjoy food more than you ever have in your life when you first get out. But after a couple of weeks, you do tend to forget. So that's why you do need to reset these things, reset your brain about what you appreciate.
And then you always get called to another adventure, and this is the common theme?
Yeah, this is a closing tradition on the podcast. It is titled The Call to Adventure. So we just want to ask the simple question, what's your next call to adventure?
I'm deliberately not picking one because I need to focus on the film. And if I focus on the next adventure, I'll straight away start mulling over it all night long. And I need to be mulling over the creative aspects of my film. So I'm deliberately shutting my brain down when I start having too many thoughts of the next adventure. But I think I'm going to do more shorter ones, so the turnaround is quicker, and I can learn more, in my storytelling by doing lots of small ones rather than one really big one. Plus, I've made, I've done quite a few big ones now, so I'm just going to change it up a bit. And I think really YouTube's going nuts. It's a good place to be at the moment.
I know this is also a bit of an abstract question, but I'm a really big fan when it comes to telling stories and storytelling. Do you have sort of a process in your mind of how you approach crafting a story now?
Other than what I touched on about how Loans shifted it to less planning and more just hitting record and seeing what happens. No, not really. You just always progress with how you can see. Like, you can look at something and go, all right, what shots am I going to need? Because you really need to edit. The more you edit, the more you realize, okay, I'm going to need these shots for this scene. So yeah, editing your own stuff is good. And that's why there is such good stuff happening on TV, on YouTube now, because there's all these people self-documenting their stuff and getting better at editing and not needing a huge team. And when you have a huge team, the whole story just kind of disappears because it's unnatural. So yeah, keep it small, keep it simple is my plan.
Well, it sounds like you've got an exciting few months / couple of years coming up with promoting this book and promoting Alone and all the so what, you're visiting all of Australia? What's the plan with that?
Yes, I mean, I'm doing New South Wales and Queensland with the book, but when I get the film, I'll do all of us. Yeah, I'll do all the major capitals and stuff in between, hopefully. And if that works well, I might even take it overseas. I'm not sure. But that's the plan at the moment.
Lastly, just Have you had any cool opportunities come through your DMs or emails in regarding any cool people asking you to take them out on some expeditions?
Yeah, I've certainly had that. There's actually 3 or 4 things coming up next month, which is like back to back crazy. Each one in their own right is pretty crazy. I won't talk about them though, because they're the kind of things that can change, and they're with other But yeah, there's 4 exciting things that are going to be happening pretty soon. If you follow me on Outback Mike for Instagram or Facebook or YouTube, you'll see those things as they happen. Yeah.
We'll make sure you tag you, and we wish you all the best with the book and the movie coming up, man. And thank you for your time today. It's been fantastic.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Nice.
Legend.
Cheers, Mike.